What is up, guys? Lone Wolf here. Today I'm going to be giving you guys the updated H-Pally guide for patch 10.2.7. I wanted to do this because they just announced the War Within release date, and it's going to be that late August date, so we have about 2.5 months to get our rating up and really farm those Glad wins. H-Pally has also gotten a rework since last time I've done a guide, so it's just about time I update the guide anyways. I'm going to be doing a full style guide here, so I'm going to break the video up into sections. That way you could kind of pick through it and get what you need out of it. But with no further ado, let's dive on in. I just very briefly wanted to talk about the Paladin buffs we got across some of the patches since I've not put out a guide in a while, but we got a 12% increased Flash of Light healing bonus in PvP combat. So those Flash of Lights feel super chunky right now. It feels really good to press Flash of Light. It's our main heal, so can't really complain about this. Doesn't make us an S tier healer, not by any means at all, but it is nice to have that Flash of Light. Judgment damage increased by 30%. This isn't like that big of a deal. I'm still hitting like 35, 40k judges, so pretty small still. Can't complain about getting a little bit more damage though. Hammer of Wrath, this is a pretty big buff, increased by 50% in PvP combat. So I've been hitting like 112, 115k Hammer of Wraths. And at the end of a kill chain, when you have that extra 115k to help your team, it's really noticeable. This is a really nice buff. Really appreciate this buff. Holy Shock damage increased by 20% in PvP combat. So if you are helping your team kill and you're spamming Holy Shock, yeah, you're going to feel the mana. But like, this is nice if you're like in your head, you're like, I know we could kill. This is the window. So this is a really nice buff. Glimmer of Light damage decreased by 25% in PvP combat. It's not as big of a deal. 5% nerf. Really not that big of a deal. And then the two other buffs that we got, one was on Word of Glory, so I don't feel as guilty spending Holy Power on on this button. It's nice, but it's not like super noticeable. Like I said, makes me feel a little less guilty when I spend Holy Power on this. And then the other buff that I couldn't find is we got a Denounce buff. I forget the amount I got buffed, but I've been hitting like 150k Denounces. So we're doing some big damn on the Denounces. And yeah, those are just the buffs. I really wanted to briefly go over those and let you guys know about those. Moving on to the stats, gear, gems, enchant section of this guide. Nowadays, Paladins are running as much mastery as they can get, verse, then crit, then haste. And let me explain to you why. To put Paladin Mastery simply, it's just a flat heal increase based on how close or far away you are from the target. So since you are the player character and you're 0 yards away from yourself, you always have 100% benefit of your mastery. And then if I were to heal this guard, he would have less benefit of my mastery, which would result in him getting healed less from me. So to see this in real time, I just Holy Shock myself. I get hit for 51k. Since this guard's farther away from me, he's going to get healed less on this Holy Shock. He got hit for 38k. So you can kind of see how that mastery works in real time. Now that you know how Paladin Mastery works, you're probably thinking to yourself, man, this sucks. Why would I ever want to spend all my points on Paladin Mastery? And the reason you want to do that is because they changed this talent, Beacon of the Lightbringer. And what it basically does is make any target that you beacon gain the full 100% value of your mastery. So as we've seen, that if I Holy Shock this guard far away, it'll do a 38k heal. But if I beacon him, he'll gain the full value of my mastery. And my Holy Shock will now heal that guy for, that was a crit. My Holy Shock will now heal that guy for 52k, the full, as if he was getting the full benefit of my mastery. And like I said, it works on your Beacon of Faith too. So now you have 1, 2, 3 targets, including yourself, gaining the full value of your mastery. And with that in mind, it's not really that bad because we have a lot of instant speed healing and it's super noticeable and it just way more throughput than the traditional crit haste style build that we used to run. Bubblebuddyy of Tychondris did a really good job min-maxing his gear this season, and seeing as he's the highest rated H-Pally in the game, we're going to use his character as a blueprint to gear our Pallies. Notably, he's running a blue silken lining in his helmet, which when he's above 90% health, he's going to get about 800 mastery, which is quite a lot. And then he's running the Dispel boots, so whenever he dispels, he's going to get about 650 intellect, and this could happen every 30 seconds. I'd imagine depending on certain comps he runs into, he'll swap this out for a precog maybe. The choice is yours. If you want to be sweaty, you could craft the Dispel boots and the precog boots. If you want to just play it safe, I'd recommend just crafting precog boots. But briefly going over his gear, he has a crafted crit mastery helmet, a PvP verse mastery neck. He has the crit verse PvP shoulders, the crit verse PvP cloak. My camera's in the way. Let me just move this really quick. He's running the PvP verse mastery bracers. Let me fix this. He's running the Draconic Warmonger's gloves, and that's going to be crit verse on those. He's running a PvP verse mastery belt, the 2 set legs, crafted verse mastery boots with either Dispel or precog on them. He's running the PvP crit verse ring and a crafted crit verse ring. And then he's running Battle Masters and Trinket. Notably on Battle Masters, I ran Battle Masters most of my games, but if you're confident that Teams aren't going to swap to you and kill you. Feel free to run Haste Trinket right there. He's also running the PvP versus Mastery Mace and the PvP versus Mastery Shield here. These are the stats when it's all said and done. I'm going to leave a link to Bubblebuddy's armory in the description down below. That way you guys can just click on it and then get his gear piece for piece that way. I'm going to be real with you guys. I'm nowhere near as min-maxed as Bubblebuddyy, and I did my push just fine. What I did is I went to the PvP vendor, got as many verse mastery pieces as I could. If they didn't have verse mastery pieces, I'd get the crit verse ones instead. And then I ended up crafting a crit verse ring because I like having a little extra crit to get those infusion procs to be more mana efficient. And then I crafted 2 verse mastery pieces. So yeah, the choice is yours. You could either min-max your gear like Bubblebuddyy, or you could kind of do what I did. Just go to the PvP vendor and pick up your gear that way. But we're going to be moving on to the next section of the guide. Gems and enchants, this is going to be pretty quick. Most paladins run pure Synsize Alexstrasite just because it's nice to have that extra crit while getting a little bit of mastery. And the reason why we want that little bit of extra crit is because anytime we crit with Holy Shock, let me see if I can fish one out of here. I don't know why I'm not getting one. Give it one more second. I want to show you guys this. There it is. So you get the 2 infusion of light procs, which gives you 2 free flash of lights, which makes us not go in arena. So we have really good mana management just based on that little bit of extra crit we get from the gems. Some paladins will do the opposite. They'll get that mastery because they really like the mastery, and then they'll get a little bit of crit. And then some paladins will go just pure mastery. So you could kind of choose what you want to do. If you want to get more crit than mastery, it'll help you not go as fast. You could do that through the Synsize Alexstrasite, or you could do that through the Synsize Nelthorite. If you really don't care about crit at all and you want to just go pure mastery, knock yourself out, it's going to be the Fractured Nelthorite. Going through the enchants, this is a PvE enchant. It doesn't really matter. You get the homebound speed on the back, reserve intellect on the chest, 200 speed on the wrists, shadow belt clasp. This is really expensive. I don't run this, but you could get this. I think it gives you a little bit more stamina. Feel free to opt out of that if you don't want to pay like 100k gold or whatever it was. Temporal spell thread on the pants here. It's going to give you intellect and 5% mana. Plane runner's breeze on the boots is going to give you that speed. You're really going to notice it. You're going to go pure mastery on your rings. And then main hand Sophic Devotion, of course, you're going to get the intellect primary stat buff. So that's going to wrap up gems and enchants. Let's talk about the playable paladin races. I just wanted to preface this by saying you should obviously just play whatever race you think looks the coolest. But with looks aside, looking purely just at racials, we're going to start off the tier list, and I'm going to give S tier to Dark Iron Dwarf and Dwarf. The reason why these racials is so good is there's so much bad stuff in the game you could just stone form out of. So for instance, you could stone form out of Deathmark, you could stone form yourself out of Root Beams, you could stone form yourself out of DK Silence, you could stone form yourself out of Priest Silence, you could stone form off of all the Feral and Karn Bleeds. It's absolutely cracked. And then bonus points to the Dark Iron Dwarf, because when you press stone form, the Fireblood, you get 900 intellect, which is just pretty much a full item. So yeah, these racials are absolutely cracked, and it's definitely well placed in the S tier. Right behind the dwarves in the A tier is going to be the humans. So humans can be pretty good depending on what comps you're running into. If they have a lot of stun heavy comps, you could afford to run 2 trinkets. So you could run a haste trinket and a battle master's trinket, and then you have your racial to get yourself out of those stuns. Obviously, freeing up a trinket slot, getting those additional stats is absolutely massive. That's why I'm putting them in the A tier right behind the dwarves. In the B tier, middle of the pack, you could say I'm going to put Draenei. Your heal's okay. It's mid at best. You get a 20% heal over the course of like 15, 20 seconds, I think, and has a 3-minute CD. Nothing really more to say about Draenei other than them being middle of the pack, B tier. And we're going to be moving on to the Lightforged Draenei. These guys are absolutely trash, dude. I'm putting them in the F tier. If there was anything below F tier, I would put them below that. Their racial's literally non-existent. I do have a Lightforged Draenei as my 3rd paladin. Sometimes I'll meme around and be like, oh, big damn racial, and I'll call down my racial and do like 50k, and it's on a 3-minute CD or something ridiculous. So yeah, this race is absolutely trash for paladin. Looks really cool though, so I have one. So going back over the list for Alliance, it's going to be Dark Iron Dwarf and Dwarf in S tier. We're going to put humans in A tier. Draenei are middle of the pack in the B tier, and Lightforged Draenei are absolutely trash, and they'd be below F tier if I could put them in a place. Looking at the Horde races, things aren't looking too good on this side of the board, so I'm going to start out with the Zandalari Trolls, putting them in the F tier. This is more of a meme racial to me. After 6 to 8 seconds of casting the spell called Regenerating, you regenerate 100% of your health. So this can get kicked, this can get stunned, but you'll see a lot of Zandalari Trolls, they'll bubble and then regenerate to full health. Like I said, to me personally, it just feels memey, and you don't get a lot of value out of it like you would Stoneform, for example. I'm going to couple Tauren and Blood Elf together in the C tier, And the reason why is I personally don't like War Stomp that much. I don't like how you get a 1.5 second stun and then put your target on the DR for your stun, which will DR your Hodge, obviously. So me personally, I'm not a really big fan of that. I have seen good uses of War Stomp, so it does land its place into the C tier. For Blood Elf, I would actually push this a little bit higher, but since it only purges one thing, I think it deserves its place in the C- tier. You do remember those times you get those bops. You do remember those times you purge Alter, which is really good. But most of the time, you're just purging off some other magical effect, and you don't see the light of day on your racial. But yeah, we're going to go over the tier list one more time for Horde. It's going to be Zandalari F tier, Torn C+ tier, and the Blood Elf in the C- tier. So to summarize this, the best race you could play for 3v3 Arena is going to be Dark Iron Dwarf. But at the end of the day, like I said, just play whatever you think looks the coolest. Your racial really shouldn't hinder your Glad push that much anyways. But yeah, we're going to be moving on. Let's talk about the Paladin class spec real quick. It's going to be this tree on the left here, and the good news is this really never changes unless you're fighting Hunters. Then you'll take 1 point out of Seasoned Warhorse and put that into Improved Cleanse. That's because Hunters have an ability called Wyvern Sting, and if they, let's say they shoot one of your DPS with it, it'll leave a blanket silence on them. That's a poison. And then with this talent, you could cleanse that off. I noticed that my camera's covering up the bottom left portion of the tree real quick, so I'm just going to show you guys this. It's Of Dusk and Dawn, and it's Seal of Order. Of course, I will leave a link to my talents down in the description below. Getting into depth on each individual talent, we're going to start with Lay on Hands. It's a full heal on a 7-minute CD, instant cast. In solo shuffle, you want to use this on the first or second go, just because as dampening ramps up, it makes this button actually worthless. And in threes, you have a little bit more leniency, but it's still nice to use that early Lay on Hands. That way you don't feel guilty about it. And sometimes you'll even farm this all the way back in threes, because games could last 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13 plus minutes. Blessing of Freedom, this button is absolutely insane, especially when it's paired with these two talents, the first one being Echoing Blessings. So when you get Freedom, you have 15% increased movement speed, which is absolutely massive, and you're going to have 2 Blessing of Freedoms with this talent, Blessed Hands. So this gets you out of snares and movement impairing effects. So imagine you're a mage and a warrior charges you, hamstrings you, and your paladin immediately Blessings of Freedom you. You have full reign to break this warrior's ankles now. He can't hamstring you, he can't slow you, you could Frost Nova him, you could slow him, you get that 15% movement speed to get the fuck away from him, and you could also like use that movement speed to get polys on healers, and vice versa. If you're a warrior and you charge a mage and he Frost Novas you and a paladin Blessing of Freedoms you, you have full reign to hamstring this guy and just chase him down with that movement speed and be a complete menace to the enemy team. I cannot stress this enough, Blessing of Freedom uptime is super, super important as a Holy Paladin. Hammer of Wrath is pretty straightforward. It's a finisher that generates 1 Holy Power. And this thing does massive damn, man. Like, I've hit for 150, 160k, and I would say it's #1 priority when you're trying to kill somebody, obviously. Big damn. Nothing more to say about Hammer of Wrath, really. Improved Cleanse, I talked about this earlier. Sometimes you'll take a point out of Seasoned Warhorse and put it into Improved Cleanse when you're fighting against those Hunters. That way you could cleanse the blanket silence on it. So that's Improved Cleanse, pretty much. Auras of the Resolute gives you 2 auras, one being Devo Aura and one being Khan's Aura. Khan's Aura reduces the duration of silence and interrupts on you by 30%, and Devotion Aura reduces the damage you take consistently by 3%. I'll talk a little bit more about the importance of these auras when we get over to Aura Mastery and the Holy Paladin class points, but for now, we're just going to let this be as is, and we're going to be moving on to Fist of Justice, aka Short Hodge. So your Hodge is just a 6-second stun, a magic stun, so it could get dispelled by that, just letting you guys know. What this does is anytime you spin Holy Power, it reduces the cooldown of Hodge, so you could farm down a Hodge, they say, to like, instead of being 1 minute, it could be like 45, 40 seconds, which is pretty nice. Divine Steed is the only mobility we have in our toolkit, and paired with the Talents Cavalier and Seasoned Warhorse, you could have 2 charges of Divine Steed, and you could extend the duration of Divine Steed with Seasoned Warhorse. Fun fact, this is not on the GCD, so let's say a warrior charges you, you could Freedom Steed all in one global and just get the fuck out of there. It's pretty nice. Let's talk about Greater Judgment. Anytime you throw a judge on an enemy target, it's going to absorb the next X amount of damage they would do. So let's say I throw a judge on this training dummy. The next 50k this dummy would do to me would be completely absorbed. And this talent works really good with this perk called Inflorescence of the Sunwell. So anytime you crit with Holy Shock, you could get Inflorescence of the Sunwell. Let me try to fish out a Holy Shock real quick. So here's my Inflorescence of the Sunwell buff. It's going to buff the amount my Greater Judgment does. So instead of 50k, I throw it. It spins 1 proc of the Infusion of Light, and now this guy, the next 121k damage he would do is getting absorbed. So this is really, really nice when your team is topped. And what else are you going to do? you're going to get ahead of the healing meters by throwing greater damn judges. So super good talent, super nice, and it makes the small amount of damage Judge does do, it makes it feel a little bit better knowing that you're shaving some damage off the top. Moving on to Repentance versus Blinding Light. This is a Polymorph DR and this is a Fear DR, and this is just comp based CC. So if you're running like a melee cleave that doesn't have a Poly DR, it's probably best to run Rep or running any comp without a Poly DR for that matter. If you have a Poly DR in your group like a mage, you probably want to run Blinding Light. I run Frost Mage, Demonology, H-Pally, so I run Blinding Light most of the times. My mage will double poly, I could Hodge, and then I could cover the Fear DR, so my lock could continue to do damage. Out of my Hodge, I'll just Blinding Light. Not really much more to say, it's just comp-based CCs. Run Rep if you don't have Poly DR. If you do have Poly DR, probably run Blinding Light. I kind of touched on Cavalier and Season Warhorse already, so I'm going to skip this. We run Rebuke, it's just a kick, it's really nice. Catch a lot of people off guard because some people forget H-Pally can kick, so if you're getting boxed by a caster, you can run up to him, rebuke him. If you're by an enemy healer, let's say another enemy Pally, he's casting Tyrs, super valuable to get that kick. You could stop clones with this thing. You could stop Polys with this thing. You could stop Fears with this thing. This thing is absolutely insane. I've stopped cast bolts. Dude, I've saved people's lives with this thing. This talent is absolutely insane. Do not forget to use it. I recommend the Arena 1, 2, 3 macros just so you could get your rebukes easily. Moving on to Holy Aegis, we get 4% increased armor and critical strike chance here. Pretty straightforward. I will say as a small little side effect of this, it's really good to get inflorescence of the sunwell, procs with Holy Shock. But yeah, other than that, it's pretty small little talent. Do I even need to have an introduction for this? It's the absolutely iconic Avenging Wrath Holy Paladin Wings. It's going to give us increased damage and healing by 15% for 20 seconds. It also stockpiles with Avenging Wrath Might, increasing our crit by 15%. And to add the final cherry on top of the cake, we're going to be able to throw Hammer of Wrath while our Wings is up. This is absolutely insane. It's iconic. It's Avenging Wrath. It's Wings. We're going to trade it on, the first goes, and it's just going to keep our team feeling safe and secure. Nothing really more to say about Avenging Wrath. Echoing Blessings is a nice support talent for a Blessing of Freedom, giving it a 15% movement steroid. And then also when you sack or bob somebody, after those effects end, they take 15% reduced damage for 8 seconds. So all in all, it's a pretty nice talent, and we're going to take it. Blessing of Sacrifice is an insane utility spell H-Pallies have, and I wanted to talk about it for a brief moment. It's a 1-minute CD, and whenever you press Blessing of Sac on somebody, the first component of this is they take 20% less damage, so they get a wall. But the second component is 100% of the damage you mitigate, that 20% you mitigate gets dealt back as damage to you. So you can use this as a benefit to keep yourself out of CCs, and I want to talk about the applications of that. Using Blessing of Sacrifice to stay out of CCs is super important. Let's say you're fighting MLD, Mage Lock Druid, and you see a mage coming in, he polys you, and you can't get to a pillar in time, so you pre-sack the target they're going. That way, when he polys you, the damage you take from sack breaks and puts you on the poly DR. Now you're free to stand in the open and heal a little bit more. Obviously, you still have to be careful of counterspell and whatnot. So let's say the Warlock is bad and he fears you, and then while the sack is still ticking and they're still hitting into the sacked target, that fear breaks, and now you're on DR for both poly and fear. And it just changed the tide of the game. So pre-sacking CCs is super important. Let's say a druid's gonna clone you in the opener, and you can't get a kick, and you pre-sack the kill target. So if you get cloned, you don't feel bad because he's taking 20% less damage. There's a high chance he's not gonna die just because of that wall. Or even fighting Cupid. Even fighting Cupid, you could pre-sack a trap. Let's say they're running Diamond Ice. That way the sack won't break the trap, but you're still safe because you pre-sacked the kill target, and now you've soiled their go, the opener, and then you come out, pop Wings, and you catch your team up. Using sack to stay out of CCs or avoid goes while you're CC'd is super important. As a general rule of thumb, sacking the go to reduce damage is a good thing unless your teammates use their CDs. So for instance, let's say the mage goes in, he gets charged by the warrior, avatar, the DK behind him pops A-bomb limb, you're by the pillar, you're not getting gripped, your mage alters. You don't need a sack in this situation because your mage has alter. If you sack him, you're getting no value out of your sack essentially, and you're diminishing the value of his alter. So let's say he dips down to 10%, alters back, and they still have 10 seconds left on their CDs. Now is the most appropriate time to sack him because you're preventing the first ghost's full damage by giving him that 20% damage reduction with your sack. He got full value out of his altar, and you're chilling. Alternatively, let's say they go your lock in this situation, so the warrior charges in avatars, and the DK behind him presses A-bomb limb, and your lock responds to this by pressing Dark Pact, which is a 30% shield. So you wouldn't want to sack into the Dark Pact because you want the Dark Pact to get 100% value by going from full to 0. And then let's say after the dark pack hits 0, your luck ports out and they're still rolling their CDs and your luck peaks and gets pulled by the DK and they have 10 seconds left on Avatar. Now is the most appropriate time to sack because you're not sacking into dark pact. You didn't sack and then he ported and you get no value out of your sack. So now that your luck's used dark pack and he's used port, it's the most appropriate time to sack the end of the go because you're getting 100% value out of your sack. All in all, guys, you sacking the go is never bad. Just trust your ally CDs. If they alter, don't sack. If they dark pack, don't sack. If they obviously have big walls like unending resolve, or if they block, terrible time to sack. So just be a little considerate and just read the situation a little bit before you send those sacks. But as a general rule of thumb, sacking the go is never a bad thing. Sanctified plates, armor increased by 12%, stamina increased by 6%, and the damage taken from area of effect attacks reduced by 6%. It's a nice little talent, and we're going to put 2 points into it. Blessing of Protection, aka Bop. You're going to have 2 of these, by the way, because it synchronizes really well with Blessed Hands. Ideally, the most value you could get out of this is if you're fighting some melee comp, a super bad one at that, let's say Warrior, Monk, and the Warrior runs in, Storm bolts to kill target, they pop Serenity Avatar, and then on top of all that, you bop the guy out of a stun, put him up, so he's on the stun DR, but he's taking 0 damage, you bop Serenity, you bop Avatar, it would be super good in that situation. Some hidden applications a lot of people don't know about Bop is it cuts a lot of Demonology Warlock damage because they do a lot of physical damage on their goes. So let's say a Demonology Warlock pops Tyrant, and then he has this thing called Grimoire Felguard, which summons another Felguard, which will stun you. It's a physical stun, so you could bop it off. You also stop the damage the Felguard does because he does physical damage with his axe. And then Demonology Warlocks, their Felguard, they have this thing called it's like a Blade Storm, an empowered Blade Storm. You could stop a lot of that damage since it's physical. So it's really, really good in the Demonology Warlocks, surprisingly enough. A lot of people didn't know that. A lot of people know that you can bop Karma off when monks press Karma. Just in case some people don't, I'm just throwing that one out there. The way you use your bop when you're fighting caster warrior, for example, like caster melee, it changes. So instead of bopping goes, it's more ideal to bop physical debuffs off. So let's say you're fighting mage warrior and he has sharpened blade, like he presses sharpen and it's like pretty deep in the dampening, it's getting really hard to heal. You just bop the sharpen off immediately and kiss it goodbye because you know the mage is going to take it, but at least you bop sharpen off. Or like if there's a game-changing stun, the warrior like storm bolts your DPS, you could bop him out of that stun and then just consider your bop gone because the mage is going to spell steal it. But at least you got value out of bop by getting off that mortal strike, by getting him out of his stun, maybe by even stopping a disarm on one of your DPS. When you're fighting pure casters without demonology locks to cut that damage, there's pretty much no value unless they have like a druid or something that will have a physical stun. But yeah, that's pretty much bop in a nutshell. Before we move on to the other talents, I did want to say since it does have that 4-minute CD, you shouldn't feel bad trading a bop early because more than likely you're going to farm a third bot back anyways. So in the opener, if you have to, sometimes you could save your wings a little bit and then you could bop somebody, you could sack somebody out of the bop, and then you have your tears ticking, and that's more than enough. But that's my 2 cents on bop. Sacrifice of the Just makes Blessing of Sacrifice a 1-minute CD. Unbreakable Spirit reduces the cooldown of Divine Shield, Divine Protection, and Lay on Hands, so it's going to reduce your Lay on Hands to that 7-minute CD. You're going to have a shorter bubble cooldown, it's going to be 3.5, and then your wall, it's going to be a 45-second CD, 42-second CD. So this is pretty good, the Unbreakable Spirit talent. Improved Blessing of Protection. This just reduces the cooldown of Bop by 1 minute. So instead of having a 5-minute recharge, it's going to be a 4-minute recharge. Nothing more really to say. Increase the range of your Crusader Strike, Rebuke, and auto attacks by 3 yards. Using Crusader Strike heals you for 2% of your maximum health. You honestly don't really use Crusader Strike that much. I mean, sure, if I'm in range and we're getting a kill, after I use my Hammer of Wrath, after I use my Holy Prism, after I use my Holy Shocks, after I use my Divine Toll, I'll throw in a Crusader Strike, man. It's more so getting value out of the range on your Rebuke is why this talent is good. Seal of Might increases your Mastery, which is our best stat, by 4%, and your Intellect by 4%, which is also, it's your primary stat, so this is just a win-win. We're going to put 2 points into it. Divine Purpose. Holy Power abilities have a 15% chance to make your next Holy Power ability free and deal 15% increased damage and healing. So this pretty much just buffs our WOG. This buffs our Denounce when we're running it. Big damn, big healing. There's nothing really more to say about Divine Purpose here. Seal of Alacrity increased haste by 4% and judgment cooldown reduced by 1 second. So we're just getting some we're just getting peppered with some stats and a little bit of CDR on our judge. We often to Torch of Light. Your spells and abilities have a chance to cause your target to erupt into blinding light, dealing X damage to enemies or healing. And this is more so better for healing. The damage is pretty unnoticeable. I'm going to minimize my camera right here so I can talk about these next talent trees. Of Dusk and Dawn, when you cast 3 holy power generating abilities, you gain Blessing of Dawn. When you consume your holy power, you gain Blessing of Dusk. Blessing of Dawn, your next holy power spinning ability deals 30% additional increased damage and healing. This effect stacks. Damage taken reduced by 5%, and your holy power generating abilities also grant Absorb Shield for 10% of the damage or healing dealt for 10 seconds. So this stuff is just passive. These are just like passive bonuses I don't really like think about in the game. They do take their toll on the game, obviously, but I'm not like, oh, I need to spend holy power so I could get Blessing of Dawn, or I need to like stack my holy power so I could get Blessing of Dusk. It's just passive nice things that impact our game that we really don't have to think about that much. Moving on to Divine Toll. I have a little bit to say about this ability. It's not like a super strong heal. What it does is it shoots out 3 holy shocks. So it's gonna, if you're running Illumination, it'll give everyone in your party a glimmer of light. If you're running Blessed Focus, it just kind of shoots around your glimmer. So your big glimmer healing is a little random at the start, but aside from that, this also extends the duration of your tyrs, which I'll get into more detail later. And it also helps you fish for inflorescence of the sunwell procs. So if you're not doing too well getting your procs, sometimes I don't get crits. Like, let me see. I get like, yeah. So like I get a crit here with Divine Toll, and then it'll, over the next 15 seconds, it shoots out another shock. Do you see how I got 2 more charges of inflorescence? And then it shot out another one, and I got another charge of inflorescence. So that's like 6 free flash of lights, making us super mana efficient. Obviously, in between, I'm going to be spinning my inflorescence of the sunwell, and then it would shoot out another holy shock, and I would get those charges again. And yeah, this button just pretty much extends the duration of our tyrs. It applies glimmers, and it lets us fish for those crits on holy shock when we're kind of down on our luck. And lastly, to wrap this up, we're talking about Divine Resonance. After you press Divine Toll for the next 15 seconds, every 5 seconds, you'll shoot out a holy shock. If that holy shock crits, it's really good because it'll give us inflorescence of the sunwell, which is 2 free flash of lights, which makes us super mana efficient healers in 3s. But that's going to wrap up the Paladin class points on the left side. Let's move on over to the right. Let's talk about the Holy Paladin class talent tree over here on the right side. There are a couple of things that do change. When we get to those talents, I'll let you know about them, but for the most part, it's going to stay pretty much the same. Starting with Holy Shock, it's an instant cast heal that generates 1 holy power. It can do damage as well. It's one of our bread and butter heals next to Flash of Light. Not a whole lot to say other than there's a lot of synergy with Holy Shock in our kit. I just want to show you. A lot of things enhance our Holy Shock, and yeah, we'll get to those nodes here in just a second. Moving on to Glimmer of Light, there's a lot to unpack here, so I'm going to try my best to explain this. But anytime you Holy Shock something, whether that be friend or foe, it's going to leave a buff on them called Glimmer of Light. And then if you Holy Shock again, it's going to make that Glimmer flare up and either do damage or healing based on the friend or foe status of the target. So you can see in real time how Glimmer works. I'll Holy Shock myself, I'll get a buff called Glimmer of Light. I'll Holy Shock this guard. My Glimmer heals me for 59k. Now this guard has Glimmer. I Holy Shock again, 29k. I get healed for 32k on my Glimmer. And then I Holy Shock this guard. It's on CD, give me a second. I Holy Shock this guard, and 21, and then I got healed for 22 on my Glimmer. So I'm spreading my Glimmers, and every time I press Holy Shock, people are either getting killed or damaged based on their friend or foe status to the Paladin. Glimmer is obviously insane. There's a lot of healing, and the last game I played is actually my #1 heal, so it's not an understatement. A lot of our healing. Whenever Glimmer gets dispelled, it'll pop and it'll do a little heal or a little damage. And also when you have Glimmer on you, you're taking less damage, up to 10%, depending on how many Glimmers you have spread across the battlefield. Light of Dawn is absolutely trash. I have not used this button a single time in a single game ever. We just have to take it. So that's Light of Dawn for you. I'm pretty sure I don't even have this on my bars. Yeah, I do. It's over here on the side. Just sometimes when I play RBGs, sometimes I'll use that, but Light of Dawn is absolutely a waste of your holy power. I'm not going to even waste my time explaining it anymore. Moving on to Light's Conviction, it just gives Holy Shock an additional charge. Not a whole lot to say about that, but it's pretty good. Getting into the infamous Aura Mastery, the button Paladins never press for some reason when I'm watching their games. I do not know why. This button is absolutely cracked though. It's 12% damage reduction on your Devotion Aura Mastery. So when you see those Incarns, man, Boomkin Incarn, Feral Druid Incarn, you see that A-Bomb Limb from the DK, you see that Metamorphosis coming out, just pop Aura Mastery, man. It's a 12% damage reduction, and it lines up with those 3-minute cooldowns, so you're trading a 3 for a 3, and you're just getting big value out of it, man. Like, there's no reason not to do it. If you're new to using this button, just send it on the opener, man. Send it on Avatar, send it on Combust, send it on whatever you need to in the opener. But as long as in your head, you're thinking, I used Aura Mastery, and could I have gotten better application out of it? Then you're off to a good start. Like I said, ideally you trade this for 3-minute CDs like Incarn, like A-Bomb Limb, like Metamorphosis. But yeah, 12% damage reduction on those big 3-minute goes. It's nothing to scoff at, man. And you'll notice the damage reduction the more you press this button. Let's talk about what happens when we run Concentration Aura with Aura Mastery instead of Devotion Aura. So we're going to drop that 12% damage reduction, and instead when we run Cons Aura, it makes our entire team immune to interrupt and silence effects. So this is really good into certain comps such as Shadow Play. You could get a lot of value there. Like if you get stunned by the Priest, you could trinket that Aura Mastery so he can't silence you. And if they have like a Destro lock, you could like just free cast in the opener. It's really nice. It's really nice into Frost DK anything, like Frost DK Dev, Frost DK Monk, Frost DK Shaman. I've seen Frost DK Warrior. And the whole premise of a DK is they want to grip you, stun you, silence you, and kill you in that window. A lot of people will trinket the stun, get silenced, and still die. But with Aura Mastery, it mitigates this entire problem for us. So let's say the gates drop and you're running Con's Aura and you're running 30-second cooldown reduction on your Aura Mastery, and you're running this PvP talent specifically to combat Frost DK that reduces the cooldown of your Aura Mastery by an additional 60 seconds. So now your Aura Mastery has a 1.5-minute cooldown, insanely cracked button people don't use, and it lines up perfectly with your trinket. So let's say you get gripped by the DK, he stuns you, you trinket Aura Mastery Steed, and now you're just healing yourself with instant speed healing. He can't silence you, they can't kick you, and you're topping yourself. I mean, you probably walled at this point, and you're fine. So the next go comes around, they pull you in, you literally just turn around and you bubble and you walk away. And by the third time this happens, he'll grip you in, and when he stuns you, you could just trinket Aura Mastery and you could just run and heal yourself with Steed. It's like, and then by the time the fourth go comes around, you should have won by now. But yeah, it's really good, and a lot of people don't utilize their Aura Mastery, especially against those Frost DKs, especially against those Shadow Plays, man. This button is insanely cracked. I think it's our most unused button ever. But yeah, Aura Mastery is super good. I really wish I could see you, H-Pallies, using this button more often. Going over Beacon of the Lightbringer, I'm going to skip this because I talked about how Mastery works in the Stats, Gear, Gems, Enchant section of the guide. So if you need to touch base on that, you could just rewind and watch that. I go into pretty big detail on that. We're going to be talking about Moment of Compassion. This is just a 15% healing buff on your flashlight whenever you heal your beacons. So it's pretty good, pretty straightforward. Rewards you for healing into beacons. Looking at Awestruck, Holy Shock, Holy Light, and Flashlight, critical healing increased by 20%. It just makes us do even more healing. Pretty straightforward as well. Looking at Divine Favor versus Hand of Divinity, I personally opt into Hand of Divinity simply because this spell will extend the duration of your tears by up to 16 seconds, and that's almost half the duration it can be extended by. I'll explain more about this later when we get to the Tears Deliverance talent. But also as a standalone spell, man, you cast this, you get two Holy Lights out of reduced cost, and they heal more, so it's pretty cracked. A lot of Holy Paladin stands, OGs you could say, will just run Divine Favor. This got nerfed a little bit. It doesn't give you clear casting anymore, so I kind of shy away from Divine Favor. It's still okay, but me personally, I like to run Hand of Divinity, and so do a lot of other high-rated Paladins. Looking at Glistening Radiance, spinning Holy Power has a 25% chance to trigger Glimmer of Light's healing and damage. So anytime you use WOG or Denounce, you have a 25% chance to proc Glimmer of Light, which will either do just bonus damage or healing depending on the target's on. So this is pretty nice. Just think of it as bonus damage or healing. Looking at Unwavering Spirit, this is going to reduce the cooldown of your Aura Mastery by 30 seconds. This button is absolutely cracked, as we've discussed. So having a lower cooldown on it just makes sense. If you opt into Protection of Tyr, you just get a 10% healing increase. It's not that noticeable overall, so taking the lower cooldown is a little bit better in my opinion here. Imbued Infusions, consuming Infusion of Light reduces the cooldown of Holy Shock by 2 seconds. So anytime you crit with Holy Shock, you're going to get a Infusion of Light proc, which will reduce the mana cost of your Flash of Light by 100% or make you do bigger dam on your Greater Dam Judge. But when I consume this, watch my Holy Shock here. It's going to be on CD. I'm going to do 2 flash of lights and you're going to watch the CD go down. So this talent is pretty cracked. Nothing really more to say about it. Looking at Illumination versus Blessed Focus, this talent's pretty important and it swaps a lot depending on what comps you're fighting. So starting with Illumination, this is really good into heavy dot comps. It's good into classes like Assassination Rogue, Aflock, Shadow Priest. So this will let you spread your glimmers on your whole team. So anytime you Holy Shock, your glimmers are flaring up and you're getting additional healing value into those dots. So it really helps combat that spread pressure. So anytime you see heavy dot classes, think Illumination. On the opposite side of that coin, Blessed Focus only lets you have 1 glimmer, but it increases the healing done by that glimmer by 40%, which is absolutely massive. So this is really good into, you know, melee cleaves or things that do single target goes, such as Frost Mage, Feral Paladin. The healing on this is going to be massive. So let me just show you a quick example of this. You can see Respect into Blessed Focus here. So let me put a Glimmer on myself and see how much the Glimmer of Light heals me. Glimmer of Light healed for 83k, and I'm going to show you the numbers on the Illumination side of things. Glimmer of Light healed me for, that was a crit. Glimmer of Light healed for 60k, excuse me. So 83k versus 60, that's a 13k difference. And in some of my previous attempts, you could see that Glimmer of Light healed me for 171k, which is over 3 times the amount a regular Holy Shock heals for. So this thing could crit 3 times higher than a Holy Shock, a standard Holy Shock. It's absolutely massive, and sometimes it's my #1 heal. So whenever you're thinking about Illumination versus Blessed Focus, just think Illumination, dot comps, and then anything that's not a dot comp, you want to run Blessed Focus, and you're going to have a considerable, huge notice in your throughput healing. Saved by the Light, whenever a target with Beacon of Light or Faith on it drops below 30% health, they'll get a giant shield, like 300k shield, and it has a 1-minute CD. So this is really nice. It's a nice little mini save. Whenever you're getting trained or you're the kill target, you could just put Beacon of your lesser Beacon of you. I think that's Beacon of Faith on you, and you could benefit from this shield. So like, let's say you get stunned in a Hodge, they proc you below 30% health, and then you get a 300k shield. It sometimes can save your life. So this is really nice. So you won't really think about this a lot because your Beacon's going to be on your party 1 and 2. The only time you really think about this is when you're getting trained. Just think to myself, Saved by the Light might be able to benefit me here, so I'll move my lesser Beacon onto myself, and that's pretty much Saved by the Light. Looking at Light's Hammer versus Holy Prism, to be honest, most Pallies don't even run this. They don't even run the 4 set. They just run pure Mastery. They'll take a talent out of this, and then they'll put it into Power of the Silver Hand. What this does is anytime you heal, it stockpiles up some healing, and then your next Holy Shock will be stronger. It's really nice, but since I run 4 set, I just opt out of that, and I go into Holy Prism. What this does is whenever you shoot it at an enemy, it does damage and it heals your allies. But if I were to heal an ally, it would shoot out of the ally and do damage instead. It also generates 3 holy power with the 4 set. So if you're not running 4 set, take a point out of that and put it into Power of the Silver Hand. If you're running 4 set, just take Holy Prism. It's a nice little instant speed button that does some damage, does some healing. And like I said, I don't really mind it, but it's totally optional. Power of the Silver Hand versus Holy Prism. Light's Protection, your allies with Glimmer of Light take 10% less damage. That's just another additional reward for having glimmers on the field. Looking at Divine Revelations, while empowered by Infusion of Light, Flash of Light heals for an additional 20%, and Holy Light or Judgment refund 0.5% of the maximum mana. We primarily use our Infusion of Lights on Flash of Light anyways, so consider this as a 20% steroid heal on your Flash of Lights. Super good. Commanding Light, Beacon of Light transfers an additional 10% of the amount healed. That's just some bonus healing baked into our beacons here. Power of Radiance is a really big talent. Casting Flashlight or Holy Light grants 1 holy power. We used to have to generate holy power by healing into Beacon with Flashlight, but now we don't even have to have Beacon. We could just cast Flashlight, we get holy power, or you could do that Hand of Divinity, Holy Light, and you could get holy power from that. So this talent is absolutely cracked, absolutely mandatory, and it's super nice. Divine Glimpse, Holy Shock, and Judgment have 8% increased critical strike chance. It synergizes well with getting Infusion of Light off of Holy Shock. Nothing really more to say about this. You always run Beacon of Faith over Beacon of Virtue. This is just a second beacon that does 5% reduced healing. So instead of 35% healing, it's going to be 30% healing. You'll put Beacon of Light on the primary target, the primary kill target, and Beacon of Faith on the secondary target. And then it also synergizes well with the Beacon of Lightbringer. So your beacons are gaining full benefit of your mastery, and then you don't beacon yourself just because you yourself gain full benefit of your own mastery. The only time you would swap the Beacon of Faith onto you is if you're getting trained and you want to benefit from the Saved by the Light talent that I mentioned earlier. But yeah, that's Beacon of Faith for you in a nutshell. Avenging Wrath Might versus Melee Wings. So this isn't Dragonflight Season 1. We will never run Melee Wings. we just take the 15% increased crit chance. Obviously, crit synchronizes really well with most of Paladin's kit, really well with Holy Shock. When you crit with Holy Shock, you get those Infusion of Light procs. When you get the Infusion of Light procs, your Flash of Lights are free, making you super mana efficient. So yeah, it's absolutely a no-brainer. We never run Melee Wings. We only take Avenging Wrath Might. Reclamation versus Barrier of Faith. If you don't like using buttons and you just like passives, I'd recommend Reclamation. Holy Shock and Crusader Strike refund up to 10% of the mana cost and deal up to 50% more healing based on the target's health, whereas Barrier of Faith is a button you have to press with a 30-second CD. What this does is apply a big shield to the target, and then when that target, anytime you heal, it will accumulate healing into the form of a shield, and every 6 seconds it will refresh that shield on this target. So let's say you're fighting Cupid, it's really nice to pre-Barrier of Faith the kill target, and then when you get out of the CC chain and you're healing missing health bars, every 6 seconds this will reapply a shield to the target. So there's no wrong answer here. If you like using buttons, I would recommend Barrier of Faith. Me right now, I'm just running Reclamation because I don't really have to think about it, but there are times when I'm in the mood to use Barrier of Faith, I will. There's no wrong answer. Just pick the passive if you like passives. If you're responsible with pre-sacking, pre-burying goes, then I would recommend Barrier of Faith. Daybreak is a new Pally talent. It's a 1-minute cooldown that sucks in all your glimmers and gives you mana. I have a lot to say about it, so let's break it down. So when you activate Daybreak, what this will do is it will activate your Glimmer of Lights on the targets. So if they're on friendly targets, it will heal them. And if they're on foes, it will do damage to them. And then you will see the Glimmers actually get sucked into the Paladin. So it removes the buff off your friends or debuff off your foes. And it sucks those buffs into the Paladin. And each Glimmer that you absorb gives you 2k mana a pop. So let's say I have Glimmer on me and my whole team, which will be party 1 and 2. So that's 6k mana. And let's say I tagged an enemy with a Holy Shock. When I press Daybreak, since I have 4 Glimmers on the battlefield, it's going to suck up all 4 of those Glimmers, giving me 8,000 mana, essentially. Let me show you this in real time. The best way to get Glimmers out fast is by pressing Divine Toll, since it just shoots out a bunch of Holy Shocks. So I'm going to Divine Toll. It's going to put Glimmer on this, this. I'm going to apply a Glimmer to this guard. I'm going to apply a Glimmer to this guard. I'm going to apply a Glimmer to this guard. I have one on myself, so now I'm going to suck in all these Glimmers, and when I press Daybreak, it will do damage to the target enemies, and it'll heal everyone else with Glimmer on it. So Daybreak, I sucked in all those Glimmers, I got a bunch of mana, and I got my Rising Sunlight, so the next Holy Shocks I press will cast an additional 2 times. If I'm running the Divine Plea talent, I'll press Daybreak on CD. That way I benefit the most from the mana recovery on this. You'll get 24k mana back, even if you're running Blessed Focus here, but that comes with the price of 30% reduced healing and damage over the course of 15 seconds. It's still really, really good to press this button on CD just for mana if you're running the Divine Plea. If I'm not running the Divine Plea talent, which gives me a bunch of mana from Daybreak, then I won't press this on CD for mana. Instead, I think about this more as a burst healing tool. So let me show you what I mean by that. So when you cast Daybreak, your next 3 Holy Shocks will cast an additional 2 times. So you get a total of 3 Holy Shocks for the value of 1. And if you pair this with Blessed Focus, it makes your Glimmer of Light healing really massive. So let me show you a live example of this. I'm going to put Glimmer of Light on myself with Holy Shock, and then I'm going to eat it with Daybreak, and I'm going to reapply Glimmer of Light to myself with Divine Toll. And since we're specced into Blessed Focus, I want to see how much healing we could get from Glimmer of Light and Holy Shocks in 1 global. So we're going to get 3 Holy Shocks and 3 Glimmer of Lights. Let's see how much healing we could get. That one was 1 crit on Holy Shock. Maybe we'll get better. Yeah, this one was really good. So we're going to add up all the Glimmer healing and all the Holy Shock healing and see how much we get in 1 global. Glimmer of Light healed for 169. This Glimmer of Light healed for 84k. And this Glimmer of Light healed for 171k, which is pretty good. So just from Glimmer of Light healing alone, we got 428k healing. And now we're going to add the Holy Shock healing into the equation as well. So this Holy Shock hit for 164k. This Holy Shock hit for 52k. And this Holy Shock hit for 52k as well, giving us a total of almost 700k healing from 1 global. That's absolutely massive. All in all, Daybreak's absolutely insane. It's really good for Pallies, and it was a really positive change that came with our rework. Like I said, you could press this on CD if you're running Divine Plea for mana. If you're not running Divine Plea, pretty much use this when you need big burst healing, and that applies with Illumination as well. It won't be as much single target healing, obviously, but you could still crank that AoE spread pressure healing with your Daybreak Holy Shocks. I'm going to talk about Blessing of Summer, and this is a really nice button. It's actually 4 buffs built into 1 button. So you get Blessing of Summer, Autumn, Spring, and Winter, and we're going to start out with Summer. So what this does is you put a buff on somebody that lasts 30 seconds. It gives them a 40% chance to deal 20% additional damage as holy per spell or ability used, or like auto attack or whatever it may be. Anything that does damage has a 40% chance to deal an additional 20% as holy damage. And this does a lot of damage, man. So at the start of the game, you just want to throw Summer on, somebody when they pop their CDs, and you want to put it on the target that does the most damage. So if I'm playing Frostmage Demonology Lock, it makes more sense to put it on the Frostmage on his Icy Veins than it does on the Demonology Lock's Tyrant. So yeah, you get the gist of this. Put it on the highest dealing damage go in your party, and that's Blessing of Summer. Blessing of Summer turns into Blessing of Autumn. So what this does is blesses an ally for 30 seconds, causing their cooldowns to recover 30% faster. This is super situational, and depending on the needs of my party is who I'll put this on. So let's say my Frost Mage has Icy Veins coming up in 20 seconds and we're getting really close to a kill window. Of course, I'll put it on my Frost Mage where his Icy Veins go. That way we could get to that kill window faster. If my lock is getting trained and he ported a Dark Pact, I will put it on my lock in this scenario because we need to play more defensive and we need to recover that port. We need to recover that Dark Pact faster. If I bubbled and I trinketed and my bubble, let's say it's coming off CD faster and I need to get my trinket and it's barely off CD and I need to be safe, then I'll put Blessing of Autumn on me. That way my CDs can recover faster. That way I could get to my bubble trinket window faster. It just read the room a little bit, and then based on who needs CDs, rather that be offensively or defensively, put Blessing of Autumn on those targets accordingly. After you cast Blessing of Autumn, it turns into Blessing of Winter, and what this does is pretty much give you 15% of your base mana over the course of 30 seconds. In a 3v3 situation, you're the only healer on your team, so you're always going to be just giving this to yourself. If you're playing RBGs as an H-Valley for some reason, I still don't give this to other healers because I'm really selfish. I'll just give it to me. But yeah, this is just 15% base mana regen over the course of 30 seconds. Last but not least, when you cast Blessing of Winter, it turns into Blessing of Spring, and this buff is pretty interesting. Bless an ally for 30 seconds, increasing their healing done by 15% and healing received by 30%. So if somebody's getting trained, let's say my mage is getting trained, I will just put Blessing of Spring on them. That way they get 30% increased healing received. It's better used that way. But if I'm fighting a Rot comp, let's say I'm fighting a Splay, or I'm fighting a Affliction Lock Assassination Rogue, then I'll put Blessing of Spring on myself. That way I could have my healing is increased by 15% on my allies as well, and then I have that 30% increased healing on myself. So if somebody's getting trained, put Blessing of Spring on them. If you're fighting a Rot comp with a lot of dots on it, then put Blessing of Spring on yourself. That way you could boost your throughput healing to your allies as well. Since Tyrs is a pretty big deal and I'm going to be talking about it a lot, I'm going to save it for last and talk about these two talents real quick. Glorious Dawn, Holy Shock has a 10% chance to refund a charge when cast, increasing by 1.5% for each Glimmer of Light. Glimmer of Light's healing damage decreased by 10%. So all this is a talent that obviously increases your Glimmer of Light healing, and it gives you a small chance to get free Holy Shock depending on how many Glimmers you have out. So it's pretty nice. Inflorescence of the Sunwell is one of the main ways, if not the main way, we keep our mana as H-Pally. And balancing your Infusion of Lights is really important. So Infusion of Light has one additional charge, increasing Greater Judgment's effect by an additional 50%, reduces the cost of Flash of Light by an additional 30%, and causes every 3 casts of Holy Light to generate an additional Holy Power. So the way you get Infusion of Light is whenever your Holy Shock crits, you get these two, since you spec into that talent, you get 2 charges of Infusion of Light. And what this actually does is it buffs your Flash of Light to be 100% free of mana. Holy Light generates an additional 2 Holy Power, or your Greater Judgment prevents 150% more damage. And we have a little bit of a juggling act with our Infusions of Light. So there's a couple scenarios in how you'll spend your Infusions of Light. If there's any healing that needs to be done, like maintenance healing, you're going to spend them on Flash of Light. So if people's health bars are full, you're going to want to prioritize your Infusion of Light on Greater Judgment. That way you can get ahead of the damage, because this target will now deal 121k less damage. Sometimes it goes up to like 300k. So it's pretty good. But yeah, all in all, if you have any healing that needs to be done, you need to spend your infusions on Flash of Light. And if everyone's full health, then you could spend your infusions on Greater Judgment. And then the other part of this, where it says every 3rd Holy Light you cast, you get an additional Holy Power, you could just ignore that and consider it every now and then as a nice little trickle of Holy Power. We honestly don't really cast Holy Light too often, if not ever. The only time we'll be actually casting Holy Light usually is with Hand of Divinity anyways. All in all, guys, the key to longevity in Paladin mana is through Infusion of Light whenever you crit with Holy Shock. Remember, you get that buff. And then since Inflorescence of the Sunwell gives you an additional charge of Infusion of Light, and it makes your Flash of Light 100% free to cast, that's where you get the insane longevity in your mana. So people ask me, like, how do you get those 10, 11, 12, 13-minute games without ever taking a single drink? And it's all because of Infusion of Light and Inflorescence of the Sunwell, man. By balancing my charges, I'm able to have insane throughput and keep my team up for free. So let me show you an example of this. Let's say the gates drop and there's an enemy Resto Druid on the opposite side of the battlefield here. And I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to get to that 13, 14, 15-minute mark against this Resto Druid that's just going to Shadow Meld Drink Shadow Meld, drink, Shadow Meld, drink. And the way I'm going to do that is by juggling my Infusion of Light procs and getting mana back from Daybreak. So since I'm not by PvP dummy, I'm going to pop my wings so I get a little bit more crit to help me with those infusions. So let's say the battlefield, the gates drop, and we hit the battlefield, and I start fishing for infusions immediately. There's infusion, 2 free flashlights here. Spend, wog, fish for infusion, 2 free flashlights here. Spin, wog, fish for infusion, free wog, so spin that. Fish for infusion, don't get it. Fish for infusion with Divine Toll, don't get it. Spin my Holy Power, Daybreak, that way I could fish for infusion. Still didn't get one. So in this situation, I'm going to be burning a little bit of mana here, but I'm like coming back to that Daybreak Holy Shock. I get infusion, and then I could spin my Holy Power, double flash a light, spin my Holy Power, fish for infusion. Didn't get, spin Holy Power, fish for infusion, get, spin Holy Power, double flash a light. And then over the course of like 30, 45 seconds, I only burnt like 9% of my mana. It's absolutely insane. And I would even say that run I just had, it wasn't really that good because usually you get way more infusions of light. Like in situations like that, I wouldn't have even burned 9% mana. I would have probably burned like 3, 4% of my mana. You never want to be capped on Holy Power, so when you're fishing for Infusion of Light, it's really good to pepper in some wogs. So times you could do this is when you have no Holy Shocks, so you have 3 Holy Power, wog. If you have 5 Holy Power, you obviously want to wog. But in between those wogs and Holy Shocks, you're recharging Holy Shock. That way you can spend less mana. That way you could fish for Infusion of Light. That way you could get those free flashlights. That way when you flash of light, you get Holy Power. You could wog and then still recharge your Holy Shock. So let me show you an example of this. The gates drop, and I'm ready to be mana efficient. So I'm going to fish for Infusion of Light. I get 2 free flashes into wog. I'm going to fish again with Holy Shock. I don't get Divine Toll to fish. Don't get, so I'm going to wog. It's going to proc. I get 2 free flashlights here, so I spend. Wog. I'm going to fish for infusion. I get, so I spend free wog. Double flash. Spend. It procced again, so I get a free flash. Spend. Fish. Since I got a free Holy Shock here, I'm going to spend both of these on 2 free flashes. I'm going to Daybreak so I could fish for more. Daybreak, 3 Holy Shocks, no crits. So I'm going to spend, fish. I get 2 free flashlights here. I'm going to spend, and then I got 2 free flashes. And then I'm going to fish again, spend. I'm going to fish again. I'm going to fish again, spend. And Divine Toll's coming off CD already, and my mana dipped down to 97%. And I already have Divine Toll back up, and I have another charge of Holy Shock. That way I could start the cycle all over again. I could spin my Holy Shocks to get Infusion of Light procs, so I could spend them on double free flashlights. That way I get free Holy Power. That way I could use my Holy Power to reset my Holy Shocks. That way I could fish for Infusion all over again. It's like a giant Paladin mana circle, and it really is the key to longevity in Paladin mana, man. Like, please, please, please be smart with your Infusion of Lights. And you want to spend them on your bread and butter heal, flash a light. You're going to go so far. You're going to have so much mana if you just consider your Infusion of Light procs. And yeah, guys, there's going to be times where you don't get Infusion of Light procs and you're going to be like, fuck, it's going to really hurt my mana, but I'm going to have to spend some flash of lights. I'm going to get that Holy Power. Throw it into wog. Fish for infusion. Fish for infusion. Fish for infusion. Thank God I finally got an Infusion of Light proc. I could be mana efficient. Those times will come in the arena, and there's really nothing you can do about it. But just be mindful, that will happen. Moving on to Tyrs, this spell is absolutely insane, and you're going to want to have good uptime on this if you're going to succeed on Holy Paladin. Releases light within yourself to heal 5 injured allies instantly, and an injured ally every 0.9 seconds for 20 seconds up to X. Allies healed also receive 15% increased healing from Holy Light, Flash of Light, and Holy Shock spells for 12 seconds. This is the most important part about the buff. Not the healing from the buff itself, the actual steroid it gives your healing. So your Flash of Light, Holy Shock, and Holy Light spells will be doing 15% more healing. Just let that sink in. That's absolutely massive. And then this ties into Boundless Salvation. Your Holy Shock, Flash of Light, and Holy Light spells extend the duration of Tyrs on yourself when cast on targets affected by Tyrs Deliverance. So whenever you Holy Shock, Tyrs extends to 2. Every Flashlight extends Tyrs duration by 4. And every Holy Light you spend extends the duration of Tyrs by up to 8 seconds. And you could cap this out for an additional 40 seconds. That means you could have Tyrs up for a solid minute, because Tyrs last 20 seconds, but you could have the duration of Tyrs if you extend it by healing up to 1 minute. I just want to stress the importance of this buff because it's a 1.5 minute CD with a 1 minute duration. It gives you a 15% increased healing steroid on all your healing, and that's the same amount of healing you get from Wings. Like, I understand you could use Hammer of Wrath and that Wings gives you crit, so you could fish for Infusion of Light and be mana efficient, but this is going to give you that throughput, the same amount of throughput you get from Wings, which is wild. And it's like a little mini healing stream totem that's constantly ticking in the background too. You know, it's hitting your allies, it's hitting you, adding a little bit more value to it. So the only downside of this is if you get CC'd and you don't get the full 1 minute duration value out of it, it could be really, really bad and you could really feel this. So how are we going to reach that 1 minute duration? What's the smartest way to use Boundless Salvation to get the most out of our Tyrs? Guys, it's super important you don't get CC'd before you extend the duration of your Tyrs to prevent it from falling off and getting no value out of it. So let's say the game starts, and as the gates drop, you pop Tyrs Deliverance for some reason without gauging if the team's actually going to commit to a fight or not. So they're not committing, and you walk over your pillar and you burn 3 seconds, and you're at 17 seconds of Tyrs now, and you finally get sapped. So you get sapped for 6, half sapped for 3, quarter sap for 1.5, so he shaves off an additional 10 seconds of your Tyrs, so you're at 7 seconds now. He blinds you, and let's say it takes you a second to trinket, and then he full kidneys you for 6. Your Tyrs is going to fall off in that kidney, and you're going to get 0 value out of it, and you're not going to have your 15% healing steroid, and it all could have been avoided if you gauged if they were going to commit to a fight, or in this case, since they have a stealthy, if you at least press Divine Toll to give yourself that 12-second cushion with your Tyrs, so you could afford to tank some CC and then extend the duration that way. But I can't stress this enough. It's super important you don't let Tyrs fall off due to CC in the opener. At least press Divine Toll with your Tyrs after you press it. To summarize, Tyrs is a super important spell that we need to be pressing on CD to help us with that throughput we really struggle with on our class. The only time you wouldn't really press Tyrs on CD is if you know a go is coming, then you could afford to wait a little bit and then pre-Tyrs the go and be just fine. Divine Toll is going to add 12 seconds to your Tyrs. Daybreak's going to add 18 seconds to your Tyrs if you use all 3 of the Holy Shocks associated with it. And finally, Hand of Divinity will add that 16 seconds to your Tyrs. So extend the duration of your Tyrs the way you see fit. I showed you how I like to do it, but we are going to be moving on. Moving on to PvP talents, I'm going to be talking about all the talents individually and just some setups I use against certain comps. When in doubt, use the Tried and True, Blessed Hands, Searing Glare, and Denounce. It's on average good against all the comps in the game. But let's dive into specifics here. So Blessed Hands is going to give you 2 Hand of Freedoms, 2 bops. Super important, even against casters like mages, boomkins. Having those extra freedoms is really nice, not necessarily the bops. But earlier in the video, I was talking about how bop is really good into Demonology Lock. So if they Grimoire Felguard you, you get a lot of value out of bopping Tyrant Goes and Grimoire Felguard. So Blessed Hands is still pretty good into casters here. And you're going to take this every single game, no matter what. This is the only PvP talent in your arsenal that will never change, and that's going to be Blessed Hands. Searing Glare is a super powerful AoE cone that you cast in front of you that puts a debuff on people that makes them miss all their attacks and spells. They could still heal during this, and that's about it, and kick. But this spell's really powerful because you avoid a bunch of damage. So for instance, I pre-glared dragons rain from above when they turn into, where they go into the air and like fly over you and stun you. I've pre-glared dragons, so they'll go into the animation, fly over my whole team, miss, stun nothing. I've pre-glared polys, clones, spheres, all sorts of CC. I've pre-glared goes from classes. Like I'll see a warrior heal Warbreaker, and then I'll pre-glare him, and then he'll pop Avatar and Dragon's Roar, and he'll do no damage. His Blade Storm does no damage. When DKs grip you in with their hands and you steed away, you could turn around and glare them and stop a lot of the damage on their go. I've glared Serenities, I've glared Combust. Another interaction with the spell that's really cracked is it goes through Priest Phase Shift. It could go through Demon Hunter Glimpse. So as they're glimpsed at you, you could pre-glare, and as they'll still tag them with glare. So when they land, they won't be able to do anything. You could glare through bombs. So if a rogue smoke bombs, sometimes I'll run up to the bomb and tell my team, you're fine. I glared it. So you avoid a lot of the damage from the bomb. You could get real creative with the spell, but my advice is to pre-glare CCs, like clones on you that your team can't kick, or if you're rebuked on CD, you could glare clones that are coming in on you, or polys or anything of that nature. And another really important thing about glare is to get a lot of value out of this, you could glare goes. So as you see that You know, as you see that Rhett popping his wings with the warrior and his avatar, you could get a little close because this has kind of a long range. You could get in a little bit and then glare that go, and you shave 4 seconds off their go, which is really nice. It's really noticeable. One last thing about this is if you're getting trained and you have to press bubble and you're topping yourself, and as your bubble's ending, it's never bad to glare out of your bubble. That way you 100% get the cast on your glare because you're bubbled, and then you get a little bit more time to recover out of your bubble because you glared them before your bubble ended, and you have that 4 additional seconds to catch your team up. Glare is super good, super cracked, and that's Searing Glare for you. The last little thing I want to add to Glare before I move on is you could use this offensively as well. So for instance, if the healer's CC'd and you glare a DK, he can't Death Strike to heal himself. Like, he'll be pretty fucked. And then sometimes you could tag locks with this if they're draining life, their healer CC'd. Tag a lock with Glare. He can't drain life to heal himself while his healer CC'd. Just a small little thing I wanted to add to Glare. Big damn denounce. For those that don't know, this is a 1.5 second cast, costs 3 holy power, no mana. And what this does is it'll send a bolt of holy light at the opponent, dealing damage. I've had this hit anywhere from 80k. I've had this hit anywhere from up to 200k. You get those massive denounces and your opponents really do feel them. But the cool thing about this spell is after it hits the target, it will leave a debuff on them that prevents them from critting for 8 seconds unless it gets dispelled. So putting this on classes that lean into crit gameplay will leave those classes in tears, man. It like changes the flow of the game. So let's say you're harassing an enemy Holy Paladin with denounce, so they're not getting infusion of light procs. That now they can't get any free flash of lights, and they're panicking because they're running because you're spamming denounce on them. Or like putting it into devastations, demon hunters, fire mages, arcane mages. You really see the damage from those classes that do lots of crits go down. Even into monks, like they can't crit you for 400k on a rising sun kick. Why? Because they're denounced. Do you know what I mean? It's good putting on classes that don't rely on crit as well. Like imagine putting it on Unholy DK, which is a very mastery haste built class. It will just mitigate the crits that they would get through their kit anyways. So you really do notice the damage reduction that denounce gives to you. And the best time to do this is if your teammate is topped, if your team's topped, I should say, and you have extra holy power, just send it on a denounce. And the second best time to do this is if you're in a kill window, the healer CC'd, and you're trying to contribute to the team, you're going to send those big damn denounces, your Hammer of Wraths, your Holy Shocks, your Prisms. Yeah, it's a really, really nice talent, and that's big damn denounce for you. I'm going to get all the dead talents out of the way that we never use. Avenging Light, never use. Ultimate Sacrifice, never use. Darkest Before Dawn. I'll use that sometimes in RBGs if I do RBGs every now and then, but in arenas, never use. Spreading the Word, never use. There could be some application. You use this maybe against wizards. You get a little more value out of your freedoms here, but honestly, in all my Glad games, I never used this talent once. And Hallowed Ground is the other spell that I've honestly never used one single time in any of my 3v3 arena matches. Looking at Divine Vision, I'll only run this when I see Frost DKs on that enemy team, so that could be Frost DK Warrior, Frost DK Devastation Evoker, whatever it may be. What this does is reduce the cooldown of your Aura Mastery by 1 minute, and since we've run Aura Mastery cooldown reduction and Unwavering Spirit, it makes your Aura Mastery line up perfectly with your trinket. And then since you're fighting the Frost DK and you're using this as a tool to mitigate their entire go, you'll run Kant's Aura, and let's say you get grabbed by the DK, he Binding Sleets you, he gets all of his stuff rolling, he stuns you, you immediately trinket Aura Mastery, that way you can't get Strangulated, and you steed away, and you just top yourself, and then next go on Pillar of Frost, you could just trade your bubble, and then the third go on the third pillar, you'll be able to trinket Aura Mastery again, and then on the fourth go, you'll have to pre-bop or something, but you probably should have won by now. But yeah, this tool, Divine Vision, is really, really good into Frost DKs, and that's pretty much when I'll run that. Judgments of the Peer is actually a really good talent into certain classes. I have some footage I'm going to show you, but you could pretty much Judgment out of Root Beams, out of DK Silences, out of Pre-Silences. Since Judgment is considered a physical spell, you could actually cast it while you're silenced, which is pretty cool. But yeah, I always run this into Boomkins no matter what. That way I can just get myself out of Root Beam. And sometimes I will run it into DKs, not as much into Shadow Priest, but you can judge yourself out of Shadow Priest stunts as well. And guys, it's a percent-based thing, so if you're in a Root Beam and you have Boomkin dots on you, there's a chance you might dispel one of the dots instead of the Root Beam. It's not guaranteed to get you out of every single Root Beam, but more often than not, when I throw my Judgment, I'm getting myself out of those Root Beams. So just be aware it's not 100% counterplay to Root Beam, just since it's percent-based on how many debuffs you have. But yeah, it's still good. Divine Plea is actually not too bad. So whenever you daybreak, you're going to get a flat 24k mana over the course of 15 seconds. But during that time, you're going to have 30% reduced damage and healing. So in high dampening, you're really going to notice the healing debuff. But you do get longevity in your mana pool from this. And I pretty much run this into certain comps. Like any caster cleave, I'll run this just because I know I'm in for a long game and I need to have a lot of mana. Any team with a Boomkin on it, like Boomkin DH, Boomkin Warrior, I know Boomkin plays on that 3-minute kill window with their Incarn. And they want to get long games and then get high dampening Incarn. So I've run Divine Plea into every single Boomkin I run into, no matter what. Certain healers, I feel like I'm not going to out mana, like Resto Druids that can just Shadow Mill drink the whole game. I need to have Divine Plea. That way I could keep up with their mana. Sometimes you don't get those drinks, man, and Divine Plea really does help you out in those situations. Into Prez, sometimes I'll run this into Prez just because they have really good mana management, excuse me. Shaman, not so much. Priest, not so much. Monk, not as much either. But yeah, this is pretty good into those certain niche situations like double caster cleave, teams with boomkins, and certain healers that you're afraid that you won't be able to out-mana. I almost skipped over Cleanse the Weak. It's actually really good into Assassination Rogues because anytime you flash heal, it removes all disease and poison effects. So you're getting rid of those big wound poisons on the Assassination Rogue. Super good into Assassination Rogue. It's really good into DK too because DKs do a lot of damage with their diseases. So anytime you flash heal against the DK, you're cleansing their dots and they have to reapply them. So this is really good in those niche situations against those Assassination Rogues, into those DKs. You can cleanse off Devouring Plague from Priest too, but I honestly don't run Cleanse the Weak that often into Shadow Priest because there's other talents that I get value out of fighting like Shadow Plays and whatnot. But yeah, that's Cleanse the Weak. Super good. Run this into Assassination Rogues without Afflocks on their team, and definitely into DKs to put that nail in the coffin. Now that we talked about all the PvP talents, I want to go through certain PvP talent setups that you could use against certain comps, but trusted, tried, and true. You could use this against pretty much any comp and have success with it. Obviously, there's other talents that are good against other comps, but on average, this is pretty good into everything. This is really good into melee cleaves, especially because you get double freedom against them. You get double bop against them. You could Searing Glare melee cleave goes, which is really good. And then you could stop their big dam by putting denounce on them, stopping their crits, stopping those Demon Hunter crits, those Warrior crits, etc. If there's a DK on the melee cleave, like DK Demon Hunter, for instance, or DK Ret, I will actually swap denounce out for a Cleanse the Weak into DKs. That way, anytime I flash of light, I'm also cleansing off all their diseases, which is also slowing down those DKs. So this setup's really good into DKs if you are fighting those melee cleaves. Into a caster cleave, this is pretty good because you get double freedoms for those slows they have, and bonus points if they have a demonology lock. You have 2 bops to help with Tyrant Goes, Grimoire, Felguard Rush Goes. You get that longevity in your game with Divine Plea, and then Searing Glare is also good to stop any of that incoming CC. And then sometimes you could also get really good Searing Glares on goes against casters. So this is a pretty decent caster cleave setup. Any single team with a Boomkin on it, I'm running this just because, like I said, you get the double freedom, which is really good. Sometimes you get the value out of the bops here. Well, with Boomkin you will because they have bash, so you could bot people out of bashes if you have to. Divine Plea, because Boomkins have that 3-minute window on their Incarn, so they like to play long games and get big Incarns and high dampening. So Divine Plea is really good there. And then the off chance that you judgment yourself out of a root beam against Boomkins, it's super good. So any single team with a Boomkin on it, this is a really good setup. This setup's really good into Frost DKs. So Frost DK Dragon, Frost DK Warrior, Frost DK whatever it is. You just get those double freedoms against them. You could get some value out of Bop. I know not on Pillar, but you could get yourself out of some stones here. Glaring DK Goes, if you get the chance, it's really good. And Divine Vision to shut down the go entirely on that Frost DK is priceless. So this is really good into any comp with the Frost DK on it. I'm going to talk about the Holy Paladin healing rotation now. It's pretty straightforward. So first and foremost, to be mana efficient, we're going to be fishing for Infusion of Light with Holy Shot crits. Secondly, when we get those Infusion of Light procs, we're going to spend them preferably on 2 flash heals. Unless health bars are pretty full, then you can spend one on a Greater Dam Judge and that'll be just fine. Thirdly, you don't want to, well, ideally you don't want to cap on Holy Power unless your team's taking massive damage, and then you get into this mode where you're fishing for Infusion of Lights and then spinning them on your flashlights, and since your team's taking so much damage, it doesn't really justify a WOG, and you want that big HPS from flashlight, it'll look something like this. Let me show you. You're going to fish for Infusion of Light, and then you're going to spin those on double flash only. You're going to fish for Infusion of Light. You're going to spin on double flash and go over your Holy Power cap here. You're going to fish for Infusion of Light still, and then you're going to like get that maximum HPS with Flash of Light right there. So that doesn't happen very often, but when the time comes to have massive HPS, that's going to be the way you're going to do it. And finally, if health bars are full, you can do some damage with Judgment, Denounce, Wrath. You could tighten up your positioning. You could glance over at your DRs. You could just gather some information if health bars are full and there's nothing really else to do. So I'm going to show you an example of this healing rotation live. So first and foremost, we don't want to cap on Holy Power, and we want to fish for Infusional Light procs. So let's say the game's starting and I'm doing some maintenance healing. I'm going to fish for my Infusional Lights. I'm not getting them. I'm still fishing. I get Infusional Light. Don't want to cap on Holy Power, so I spend 2 flashlights here. Don't want to cap, spend, fish for Infusional Light, fish for Infusional Light. Don't want to cap here, spend, use my 2 infusions here. Don't want to cap, spend, fish for Infusional Light here, spend. Don't want to cap, so I'm going to spin my Holy Power, and then I'm going to fish for Infusional Light, and the cycle goes on. I wanted to talk about trading CDs as H-Pally because we have absolutely massive saves, and we need to use them properly in order to win our games. So getting Daybreak and Toll out of the way, I pretty much use Daybreak on CD as a mana cooldown just to get longevity out of my mana. Yes, you get that nice burst healing with it, but to me, it's more of a mana cooldown, and the burst healing is just a nice little bonus I get from it. Of course, if I see a go coming, like an Incarn's coming off cooldown, or Blades is coming off cooldown, or Combust is coming off cooldown, I'll wait a little bit and then use it on the go. That way I have more throughput healing. But pretty much as a mana CD every 1 minute, I'll be pressing that. And Divine Toll, I pretty much only use this to extend my tiers. It really doesn't do that much healing. But you do get a lot of value out of extending your tiers with Divine Toll. So with that said, let's move on to the big CDs. So let's say the gates drop and we're getting ready to trade CDs on the first go. The first thing I'll do before combat even starts is I'll run to my pillar and I'll get tiers up, and then I'll extend it. I talked about how to extend tiers earlier in this guide, so if you need to refresh your mind on that, go ahead and check that out. And then let's say they make contact, and the first thing I'll do is trade my wings. So they have big CDs, big damage from those CDs. I have big healing with my wings, so I'm matching CD for CD here. It's a fair trade. And then on Aura Mastery, I like to map that to certain big damn, like really big damn CDs in the opener. So like if I see Incarn by Boomkin or Feral Druid, I pop my Aura Mastery. If I see Slappy Hands, I'll trade my Aura Mastery into that. If I see a Combustion, I'm going to pop my Aura Mastery. Like if I see anything with massive, massive damn, like a Serenity, I'll trade my Aura Mastery into that. So if Aura Mastery is off CD and you see these big CDs like Slappy Hands, like Incarn, like Serenity, like Bust, you want to trade that Aura Mastery strategically into those goes, and you don't really feel bad ever giving your Aura Mastery to those big goes because it's a CD for a CD and it's a fair trade. Now that we survived the first go, I want to talk about the cooldowns that we still have left, which is going to be Sack, Double Bop, Bubble, and Lay on Hands. I'm going to be focusing on Sack and Double Bop here. So Sack and Double Bop are really good filler defensives in between goes. So let's say you survived the first go, you traded your wings, your Aura Mastery, and now your lock eats a sharpen after the go. It's a really good time to sack your lock here just to keep him offensive, to keep him healthy and confident. And then you're stalling the game to get to that second go. So let's say you get to the second go, you trade your wings and Aura Mastery again, and in between the third go, he eats a nasty Essence Break. At this point, you could just bop that Essence Break. That way you're keeping him topped, you're keeping him healthy, you're keeping him confident, and you're stalling the game to get to that third go, etc., etc. So now you get to that third go and you trade your wings and Aura Mastery again, and now Sack's off cooldown, so in between the go, you sack. You get to the fourth go, you trade your wings and Aura Mastery again, and now in between the fifth go, you bop again, and it goes on and on and on, etc., etc., etc. There's going to be niche situations where you're going to put bop on cooldown early in openers. That way you could farm a bot back, and then there's going to be niche situations where you're sacking to avoid CC. That way you could keep your team nice and healthy. But as you play more games on H-Pally, you'll be more familiar with those situations, and you can make those judgment calls for yourself. I like to use Lay on Hands reactively. It's really nice knowing that you have Trinket Lay on Hands or Bubble Lay on Hands. It lets you greed CCs a little bit more, so maybe instead of trinketing that poly, you could kind of wait it out, and if your teammate is going to die, you could trinket the CC at the end and then just Lay on Hands them anyway. So yeah, this is a really good safety net. Pair it with Trinket, pair it with Bubble if you have to. It could also be filler if in between the go you don't have sack, you don't have bop. It's like, okay, I'll just lay you right here. We're fine. We're making it to the next go. Let's try to win the game. The last little fun thing I wanted to do to end this is talk about the comps that you could run to Glad. And what I ran was Frostmage Demo. It's a nice, fun control comp. I felt really safe playing this. We absolutely decimated every single melee cleave we ran into, and we beat a lot of the casters as well. So Frost Demo, pretty solid. Demo Shadow Play, absolutely disgusting right now. It's infesting the ladder, and it's pretty much free Glad. So if you know a Demo Lock and a good Shadow Priest, it's a nice way to get free points. This is more of a meme cheese comp, but I saw the best H-Pally in the world running double AF, and we played a miserable 16-minute game against him. ended up losing. And if you know 2 good Athlocks, then you can make people's lives miserable. What do you want me to say? Another Athlock comp here is going to be Athlock Assassination Robe. This comp is absolutely disgusting. Kidney on CD with Hemotoxin from Shiv and all that dot damage and the death mark. It's absolutely miserable to run into this. So that's a really good comp. Boomkin Lock. I saw a couple of these on the ladder. It's there. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but I did see it, so I'm just going to put it on the list. And the good old-fashioned Frost Mage Arms Warrior H Paladin from TM Borngood himself. Ran into him a couple times, and it was a really hard fight. So yeah, those are the comps I'd recommend to Glad. As Age Pally this season, we're not really healing melee cleaves, but if I had to recommend one, I would say try healing a Walking Dead if you know the right people for it. Like if you have a couple buddies that are pretty good at their classes, like, and you have nothing else to lose, then sure, send it. But all the melee cleaves I saw at high rated were rolling with Prezes, Shamans, Druids, pretty much anything but Pally. And our Paladin kit is just so good for casters, man. Like, Bop is really good. Giving freedom to casters when they're getting trained is super good. And casters have a lot of utility and peel for us Paladins that we desperately need. So, yeah, if at the end of the day, it is what it is, and I would just avoid healing melee cleaves on your H Pally this season. And that's going to wrap it up. I'm going to be active in the comments until the very end of the season, so if you think I missed something or you have a specific question, go ahead and drop a comment down below and I'll do my very best to answer those questions. I just wanted to briefly say thank you guys so much for watching my videos. Bonus points for liking, commenting, subscribing, all that good stuff. Really helps me out. And yeah, guys, have a really good end of your season. Go smash those games, go get your Glad titles, and hope to see you in the War Within. Until then, peace.